what's a way to hypnotize your friends without actually having to put them to sleep? Oh, welcome to the news. Stay till the end to find out. So, in today's episode, what we're trying to get at is a little something where you sort of connect with people that you know and you're trying to give them value. But ultimately, it's a difficult equation because sometimes there's a lot of things on the surface and sometimes you need to try to be able to help people to dig them out from their own selves. And it's a peculiar scenario because ultimately hypnosis has to do with putting people to sleep so you can try to access their subconscious. But ultimately, their subconscious is present at the same time when their conscious is present ultimately. So even though you want to try to just get directly to their subconscious and you might have to try to put them to sleep, it might just be better off to work out a little bit more smooth by just talking to them when they're awake necessarily and trying to connect with them in their subconscious, after all, by developing consistent, consecutive, aligned and ongoing messaging that ultimately corresponds to the subconscious nature of what you're trying to get out eventually. So ultimately, if you can reprogram that aspect of where you're trying to go with them in a fundamental sense so that in the short and long term that they can see the benefits, that they can see the dynamics, they can understand where you're going and where you're coming from and what you're after and what you're about and what you want, that in essence, they can give you a lane to be able to open up what's happening from their conscious to their subconscious, to be able to try to connect with the essences of connecting dots, connecting alignment, connecting a story, connecting a narrative, which in essence corresponds to hypnosis, where in essence you're trying to just go directly into the subconscious and add value in the subconscious. And so it's like a program, and ultimately when they wake up, then they have the ability to just kind of like align with whatever it is that they want or who they're trying to be after all. And so just by having the ability to connect with their subconscious, knowing fundamentally by looking deeper inside people what they're actually after, what they want, what they're trying to get to, and the intuitive of what they're trying to do in a fundamental sense to accomplish their certain goals, they're sometimes distracted by their subconscious. So without the essence of hypnosis, by actually still hypnotizing them, in essence the fundamental interest to try to be able to bring awareness to their subconscious is the focus that they are trying to consciously do after all anyways, as opposed to having a full-on program done by corresponding to like a hypnosis process where you have to fully be asleep in a like hypnotized fashion. After all, you can just try to connect with the subconscious by being able to fundamentally ask questions and allow them to be open and become more open and receptive to new actions and action taking, so that action taking connects with the subconscious, so that in essence it's possible to fundamentally connect with ultimate goals, which ultimately have the ability to ultimately connect with the subconscious, which controls a lot of the conscious mind after all, by being able to be allowed access and being allowed trust, so that fundamentally you're able to try to connect with what is 99%. The subconscious is 99% of what controls the functionalities and the brain functionalities. So ultimately, being able to get that permission, being able to get that fundamental trust on the surface, and developing a working relationship, a working dynamic where there's a connection between a work and a fundamental normal type of a dynamic, type of a relationship where you fundamentally open up to the concept that you want goals and you want certain outcomes to be able to occur, that you're fundamentally opening yourself to the subconscious being able to occur. So you're opening yourself up to new programs being available to process what could possibly consecutively happen, so that ultimately by the time that person wakes up, by the time that they get that awakened feeling, ultimately they've woken themselves up from being more or less distracted from their inability to be able to connect with what it is that they're trying to do by just aligning with ultimately their unfulfilled potential and trying to turn that into potential by shifting that by the way of connecting with certain actions that are possible to take on a day-to-day basis, by allowing a little bit of time on a day-to-day basis to be able to align with the subconscious, to align with certain actions and the body taking certain actions, so that ultimately there's time allotted to be able to try to fulfill a new sequence of events and a new series of focus, so that ultimately once that unfulfilled potential is realized as realized conceivable potential, to be able to realize unrealized potential, that is the awakened moment after all. And then they wake up out of this trance that they've been in, which is the opposite of the trance that they're supposed to be in, which is the trance that corresponds to essences that relate to what they should be wanting to do, or trying to get to a certain place that they might want to eventually get to, which in essence is something that's been hidden underneath the surface of their consciousness, to be able to understand that concept in a fundamental fashion. So ultimately giving somebody that alignment and that help to be able to wake up ultimately is like being hypnotized after all this whole time in the meantime, and then they're just kind of coming out of that trance is the realization without having to actually go into the trance, to be subconsciously reprogrammed after all, like certain hypnotists or certain people that do hypnotizings do, so that ultimately you're just trying to help people align and be able to fundamentally wake up for the first time, as opposed to needing to reprogram or develop a program for the subconscious mind, after all, and then try to reinstall that and have that new program override a past and old program necessarily that's installed within a brain mindset, so to speak, by just acknowledging tools, acknowledging processes of day-to-day repetition and repeated action, in essence, and studying and focus and having time. Also etching the time out, making time to etch out the time for this is a functional necessity when trying to follow through with this new sort of process to be able to develop a new depiction for a new direction, that ultimately that causes the wake up, because ultimately when you see the path to the end, when you see the light, when you see the horizon that leads all the way to the end goal, the end result, that directly immediately connects and collapses the essence from the present moment ultimately to the new self of a new being, of a new existence, of a new endurance, of a new encounter, of a new process of existence, and a new series of actions and events that can correspond to that, and that realization of collapsing that lack of understanding into that understanding mojo, where you see the light and you want to be able to follow through with it by taking the actions that are necessary to try to get there and align with that self that's like a better version of the self, so to speak. It corresponds to awakening from a hypnosis ceremony or session, and in essence just awakening the self into unfulfilled potential, after all. And so ultimately, to shift gears, where I heard Jimmy Fallon on a Sirius radio station recently, and I was thinking it'd be kind of cool if like these spiritual finance type of talks, type of things where we're also trying to combine it with music. It's also a little bit comedic, would be like, on like a Sirius radio show. That would be kind of fresh and kind of fun and kind of interesting. And there's also like TED Talks. TED Talks are pretty common after all, but like ultimately if like people are just talking and they like add more music in the background like this, it's like kind of like a new genre for speaking, in essence, like a new speaking genre in essence, with like music in the background type of a vibe, where it's like kind of like almost like rapping, but it's not like rapping, and it's like poetry or whatever. But this could be like its own little genre. It's like TED Talks with weird little music in the background, so to speak. So it's kind of like a new genre of like entertainment in of itself, which is kind of a joke. So that's why we should, get our own Sirius station to do more comedy also, I guess, on that, for Ding Tech Change for Games. Ding Tech Change for Games Studios. Yeah. Anyways, moving on beyond that, we're also trying to focus on the essence of developing new content by being able to bring awareness to the essence of like movie soundtracks. Like we're trying to have like movie soundtracks. So each of these are like kind of like acted out little movies. Like our little podcasts are like little movies in essence. These are like little movie situations. And so like we're trying to focus on movie soundtrack type sounds, but also at the same time trying to make movies. So like these like weird little podcasts are like little weird little episodes, kind of movie episodes, but not necessarily. So, in fundamentally also bringing this journey full circle, I was starting to try to make like music many years ago, and this has to do with just manifestation and also like following a specific thread in entrepreneurship to try to make different items occur or make different things happen, after all, which corresponds to the essence of finding a certain thread and a single thread, like in other words, one single goal in essence, to be able to like have everything tune around in essence. Like ironically, my goal was to like make music literally at the age of 15, and it's been about 20 plus years, 5 years since then, to be able to ultimately do it in this fashion, where there's a reason, there's a necessity that corresponds to or aligns to the essence or the interest to sort of make music, if you will, which is to correspond to this podcast, if you will. And so it's just kind of an interesting reflection back all those years back as to how exactly it would occur, but the alignment and the necessity to try to make Ding Tech Change for Games, and the whole bit of everything that's happened in between, like including trying to make a car in 2014, everything that's led up to everything to be able to finally just have this little podcast be a little foundation to be able to make a little bit of music in the background, is an interesting little sort of story to be able to reflect on in hindsight, based upon where I'm at the current time, is kind of where I was at 15 also. So it's just an interesting full circle vibe, because in essence all of the peculiar things that have happened, it's like trying to pull on the thread, one little thread on a sweater that corresponds to one single goal and ambition, and everything that's happened since then, to just now be able to try to land in a space to fundamentally make a little bit of music, like after so much time and energy. But it's not the bottom line. The bottom line is everything else in the background that's had to sort of happen to be in place, in essence, to be able to make the frameworks for the music to have a compartmentalization to occur, to justify the time to spend on music, as opposed to it being wasted, because it corresponds to a greater company. It corresponds to the essence of other ambitions, other goals, other energy being in line and aligned in essence. So it's kind of like a weird, almost hypnosis in of itself, like to be able to align with certain goals or align with an understanding and acknowledgement of certain goals from a very fundamental and foundational sense. Like if you know you're not going to quit, because ultimately finding the avenues and finding the ways for the dots to connect ultimately have their own strange, crazy way of things sort of happening and unfolding after all, and just staying with that one thread, that one single thread. Like I said, it's taken 25 years to have a little bit of context to make music. So it's just like that origin story at that young age up to now. Everything that's happened in between, it just relates to a context between a conceptual company, which is Think Tech Change for Games, that ultimately corresponds to the essence of fulfilling the goal. So everything that's happened in between is the fulfillment of the systems and processes and conceptualizations up to, but not limited to, this podcast that relate to the necessity of those things being in place to be able to eventually, finally, just come around and try to fulfill the goal of making a little bit of music and having the context to it, because ultimately, sound is everywhere, music is everywhere, but having a context for the music and a brand positioning and a brand purpose and a brand process is something that you have to develop, as any band does, is develop a brand. In essence, most bands get popular because of their brand after all. And so the Think Tech Change for Games brand was something that just has taken sort of, it just is what it is. I'll leave it at that. But it's an interesting, peculiar journey, and that's the entrepreneur journey that's being mentioned after all. And that ultimately corresponds to the hypnosis thing. That ultimately corresponds to just like the essence of having a thread, an initial thread, being like hypnotized into the idea that you're going to commit and follow through with getting to that thread, and just figure out all the little mechanics of the little chutes and ladders of what's necessary to be able to stack up value so that you can continue to like try to follow through with that thread, like ultimately, so you just at least get like a little bit of a chance to try to follow through with that thread and see it out and see to just get to that place of connecting with that initial goal and that initial concept and that initial interest, like like the sound, like making sound, making and such, making, in other words, music, like whatever. The bottom line is that that's almost like a hypnosis in essence, once you realize that there's that thread of potential that you can keep pulling on that thread, and that can last 25 years, it can last 15 years, it can last 5 years, it can last 1 year, it can last 6 months, it can last 1 day. After all, it depends on like the context of how you build around it and how you want it and how you necessarily want to try to see the light on the other side and try to follow through to connect with the light on the other side. And that corresponds to trying to fulfill unfulfilled potential, and just knowing that you can fulfill unfulfilled potential by having that commitment, having that soul, having that heart grow within you is the awakening of the hypnosis that can be done from a conscious state into and a communication with and a connection to the subconscious state and the subconscious mind that takes up 99% of the human brain after all. So ultimately, that's the basis for the concept of trying to like bring this around like a little bit first full circle from a few years ago and connecting that with the concept of hypnosis. But hypnosis is meant to connect like mental programs with the subconscious to be able to develop more short results that can happen in a shorter time. So yeah, maybe you could go with the hypnosis route, the full-on hypnosis route if you'd like to, conceptually, although this is the realization of unfulfilled potential realization in terms of conceptually otherwise unfulfilled potential, by exploring the subconscious and the potential to install things into the subconscious, by developing a long tunnel vision, long tunnel view of being able to get to the other side and just seeing the other side and doing anything that's necessary and relevant to build a brand around getting to the other side as the vessel and the potential vehicle to get to the other side, that brand is in essence that thing. And so building that brand, building that vehicle at the same time, and also having other people to help you build the brand, or you can do it yourself necessarily. It's always good to do. It's good to do it both ways. Realistically, if you go quicker routes, if you go shorter routes where you get there quicker in essence, and you have like people to help you and consultants to help you in essence, then you learn less. You just learn less, but you get there quicker. You get the results quicker in essence. But so it's like a trade-off. You get there quicker, you get results quicker, and then you're on to the next, and then things shift, and it's a new equation then. Or you go the longer route and you learn more. You learn more based on proxy of the little small details and minutia that you have to sort of acknowledge to be able to take one step at a time, so to speak, going on and going beyond that, if you will. That's all for now. Thanks again, Think Tech. Bye, peace, bye. Try to make hopefully a little better music in the future. Hopefully we'll see. I don't know about that though. All right, that's all. Bye for now. Thanks again, Think Tech. Bye, peace, bye. Thanks, bye. Think Tech Change for Games. Think Tech Change for Game Studios. Bye. Thanks. Bye. Peace.